President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never, ever happen. When I sit down with President Trump, it will be to discuss the future economic and security relationship between two sovereign nations. And it will be with our full knowledge that we have many, many other options than the United States to build prosperity for all Canadians.
I love the dude kind of like calmly yelling shame.
Yeah. Very Canadian. Yeah.
So just a couple thoughts, Ben. First of all, I mean, it is impossible to overstate how massive this comeback was for the Liberal Party and what an own goal it was for Trump. Trump could have had an ideologically compatible leader in Canada that he could work with. Instead, he has a guy who was literally elected with a mandate to fight him. So that's his new political reality. And not a weak one like Justin Trudeau, like a freshly installed Mark Carney. Also, you and I were laughing about how, you don't see a lot of pundits or pollsters talking about how the angry electorate and the kind of like populist, curious countries all over the world, that people are looking for some like globalist central banker with degrees from Harvard and Oxford.
Yeah.
But that is what Canadians just voted for. Like they wanted competence and stability, and they didn't care that Mark Carney is Steve Bannon's worst nightmare.
Yes, this is a huge upset result in the context of where this race stood a couple of months ago. And I mean, to unpack a couple pieces of this, the first obvious point, as you made, is that Trump has essentially accelerated a backlash to Trumpism globally in ways that we need to continue to watch. Canada is the obvious first place where his threats, his disrespect, his disregard for the U.S.-Canada relationship and for Canadian sovereignty clearly led to this massive pendulum swing to Mark Carney. But it's not the last place. We've talked about the fact that Australia has an election coming up where the center-left Labour Prime Minister Albanese had been losing in polls and is now at least even, if not in the lead. By the way, very smart of Canadians and hopefully Australians, because if you want to learn something from us, don't take this risk. You may not get your country back, if it goes down this road. And that leads to a second point, which is that, Poilievre really did try to kind of tread in this Trump light space where, they were increasingly, bombastic, xenophobic. You had him trying to kind of capture the energy we saw in that kind of weird trucker shutdown protest in Ottawa. You saw it in kind of increasingly right-wing media ecosystem growing up in Canada. And so I think, voters are not dumb. They saw, wait a second, this might feel good to some of us because we're tired of globalism or we're tired of, the elites, or we think Justin Trudeau isn't there for too long. But it's really dangerous to go down this road, both because it could weaken us to Trump, but also because it could turn us into kind of a weaker version of Trump,
Right.
And so if Trump actually doing the things that he said he wanted to do in the second term, the way that he did in the first, it could be the breaking point for the momentum for this kind of politics and democracies. We have to watch that. We'll see,
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, Mark Carney did his best to tie Pierre Poilievre to Trump in every way. I think they were calling him Trump light. They were kind of like making videos of them morphing into each other. So it really did become the defining issue.
Yeah. And now the second thing, David Axelrod, our former guru on the Obama campaign, used to say that Americans look for the opposite person of the previous person. And so the first time he said this was in 2008 when Obama was very much an opposite of Bush, But actually, if you stretch it forward, Trump is kind of an opposite of Obama.
Yeah,
Biden's kind of
sure.
an opposite. It's like a pretty coherent way of looking at things. And look, Carney is not only someone who stands up to Trump, he's the opposite of Trump. A man with deep experience in international finance at the Bank of Canada and at the Bank of England, a man with experience managing crises instead of creating crises, dealing with the financial crisis in 2008 in Canada,
exactly.
dealing with Brexit in 2015. And what we've seen is he's already kind of brushed back Trump. One of the more interesting reports I saw, Tommy, is that in the one phone call they had in which Trump came out and actually didn't disparage Carney in the same way they did Trudeau, there's a rumor that Carney threatened to dump all of America's bonds, and he knows what he's doing. He's a former central banker.
Leverage.
He knows where he's got leverage points. And we've already seen Canada, sign LNG deals with China. Like, this is a man who isn't just talking the talk. Like, he actually knows how to kind of run circles around Trump, even with Canada being a much smaller and more vulnerable economy, even as Canada may have to absorb an enormous hit from tariffs and things that Trump's doing. This is a guy that knows how to work the system that America created that Trump doesn't understand.
Yeah, this is becoming Trump's Achilles heel. You're also seeing this with the Chinese. They know the weaknesses and pressure points. Carney also took some steps to distance himself, not just in words, but in policy from Trudeau. He got rid of their carbon tax. He basically cut the rate down to zero. Carney also pledged to get rid of Trudeau's cap gains increases. And I think Trudeau just being off the stage was absolutely critical for Carney because he could project himself as a firm break from the previous iteration of the Liberal Party, even if it's a fourth consecutive Liberal Party term. Carney's fave-unfave numbers actually improved during the election, which is very surprising for someone who was kind of an incumbent. But I mean, you just don't often see that. Usually you just get worn down. Pierre Poilievre ended at 40 fave, 45 unfave. Ben, I saw this in one story that at an April rally, a woman yelled, "Lead us, Big Daddy," at Mark Carney. So that surprised me.
I mean, he does kind of exude a certain paternal...
Big Daddy-like father.
Yeah. But look, in terms of what to expect, I mean, in normal times, Mark Carney is your kind of, hyper-qualified globalist, right? He's a man that, despite what he did with the carbon tax, has been focused on climate change and climate finance for a long time. He's someone who's tried to navigate ways to minimize the negative impacts of globalization while not, junking the whole system. But I think what's interesting that we'll also have to watch beyond just the backlash to Trumpism is, did he actually stumble into a formula here that is different and kind of interesting, where, he's combining like a certain form of competence and nationalism. I mean, because there's a lot of nationalism in what he says.
Very much.
And a kind of the authenticity of a technocrat. Like he comes across as a very authentic guy.
Yeah.
I actually watched a lot of these videos with him. But he's not authentically pretending to be someone else. He's not like going on, Theo Von and trying to talk about pop culture. He's authentic by talking about like banking and hockey, which he clearly likes, and so I don't know. Maybe this is a different formula than we've seen. He is who he is. It's appealing to people, and it doesn't fit naturally in any. It's hard to think of like what campaign would you compare him to that we've seen in recent years. Like it doesn't. It's different than Keir Starmer, who's just kind of like, we're gonna make things normal again. Like there's a fight to Carney, and obviously Trump gives him the foil. But I'm not trying to raise expectations too high. He's not like some uber charismatic guy. And
no, what you're getting at is he was like the right political kind of makeup for the moment, right? It was not just that Trump was starting to fucking annex them. It was that we're threatening to destroy their economy and create a financial crisis via tariff. And this guy's like, hey, hand up. I was a central banker.
Yeah, I'm the guy.
In London and Canada.
Your guy.
Ben,
I'm your Huckleberry.
I'm your guy. Friend of the pod and new Democratic Party leader Jagmeet Singh also lost his seat in a brutal night for the NDP, his party. Jagmeet Singh came on a couple years ago. Think of them as like kind of the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party, but they went from winning 25 seats in 2021 to a projected 7 seats Monday night, which I think like lowers them below a certain threshold to be officially represented in Parliament. And I think what ultimately happened is the race just became this binary question over who can best stand up to Trump, and smaller parties like the NDP got squeezed out. I saw some of the coverage that former Congressman Pete Hoekstra is just arrived yesterday to be U.S. ambassador to Canada, which is just very funny because that went from like kind of a cushy, donor gig,
kind of a plum job for a donor,
to a real, kind of you're going to be fighting.
In
Ottawa, elbows up, Pete.
You're in hostile territory.
Yeah,
Pete Hoekstra, get those elbows up. Yeah. Well, we wish them the best. We should just say we love our Canadian listeners, and we're very glad that you have a sane, smart, tough prime minister. Again, not perfect, but better than the alternatives.
Yeah, better than the alternative. Last thing I saw, Ben, that I thought would interest you in particular, the New York Times had an interesting piece a few weeks back about how Meta had blocked actual news on the Facebook and Instagram feeds in Canada because they did this back in 2023 because those assholes don't want to pay publishers for news. It would have cost them an estimated $44 million a year out of their $164 billion per year in revenue. So there's been this huge proliferation of right-wing accounts that post kind of either agitprop or fake news all day long. And I read about that. It made me very nervous for what the impact might be on the election. Obviously, it ended okay, but it will likely be an issue going forward.
And it'll get worse. I mean, the thing is, usually you're kind of at your high water political mark after you get elected.
Right.
Those accounts, that right-wing machine, in part because they sense, that this was a blow to the momentum of Trumpism. I think you're unfortunately going to see an uptick in kind of right-wing garbage in Canada and in other places as well, certainly Australia. And look, it'll be interesting to see what the Conservatives do in Canada, because do they, out of fear that they're going to be out of step with, if their prime minister is standing up to Trump, do they want to be seen as attacking their prime minister, right? Or do they follow the lead of the Republican Party in this country and they don't care and they just become, nihilist, and they're trashing him and they're lying about things, and maybe they're not siding with Trump, but they're just trying to tear Carney down. That's an interesting political choice for the Conservatives, because there's political danger in attacking your prime minister when your country's under attack, but they kind of have some of that, like right-wing DNA that like leads you in those directions.
Yeah, big choice for the Conservative Party about how to forge a path forward. All right, thank you for watching this clip from this week's episode of Pod Save the World. To hear the rest of our show, we're going to talk about Pete Hegseth and chaos at the Pentagon. We're going to talk about Trump's meeting with Zelensky in Rome in the Russia-Ukraine peace talks. We're going to talk about tensions between India and Pakistan, Gaza, and Joe Biden's policy, and a lot more. So if you want to hear more about that, subscribe to the Pod Save the World YouTube feed. Every week we talk about the biggest stories in foreign policy, both in Washington and internationally. So check it out. It's really good.